The real world is about 7 individuals coming together from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different race, different socioeconomic, different sexual orientation, people who would normally not live together. And our basic liberal idea was that if these people live together, they will discover that they have more in common with each other than they don't have in common. And from a purely television standpoint, there will be conflict because they'll make mistakes with each other. But out of that conflict will come growth, and that growth would be our story arc for the series. So the very DNA of our show required, every season when we went into it, that we found 7 diverse people. And because we had to find a new group of people every season, we had a wonderful opportunity to explore things that were going on in America. In the 3rd season of The Real World, that was 1994, we decided we would take the show to San Francisco. And going to San Francisco, there was no way we could not deal with AIDS. That was one of sort of the ground zeros. So we had to focus on that subject. So we began, as we always do with The Real World, to cast a wide net to see who was out there. And primarily we were looking in San Francisco, but we also put the word out to different national AIDS organizations that we were going to San Francisco and that we would love to have someone in our show who was HIV positive or had AIDS. We were looking in San Francisco, we were finding some people, but we weren't finding the right person. And you know, when you're casting a reality show, you need someone who, when you change that channel, you just come on them and bang, you have to stop. There's something about them, there's that compelling presence. It could be their intelligence, it could be their looks, it could be their personality, but it's something that makes you stop and makes you pay attention. So I'm sitting at my desk in Los Angeles, and I'm opening letters, because we would get letters from people all over the country who wanted to be on The Real World. At that time, we'd get like 10,000 people applying to be on the show. It was harder to get on The Real World than it was to get into Harvard. And I open this letter, and these drop-dead gorgeous pictures of this young man fall onto the table. And I open the letter, and I start reading, and it's, "Hello, my name is Peter Zamora." At that time, he called himself Peter. But then he basically said, "I am a young man, I am a young man who found out at 17 years old in a high school blood drive that I was HIV positive." He came upon this idea that he could help educate other young people about AIDS, that maybe he could help other young people who, like him, didn't know that much about it, how they could take steps to be safe. Pedro talked about wanting to take his message to a larger audience, but he also talked about being a young man who wanted to get away from his conservative family and wanted to go to San Francisco and maybe fall in love. Anyway, I passed the pictures and the note over to Mary Ellis Bunham, my late partner, and she looked at it, read it, and she goes, "Okay, yeah, we're going to Miami to meet Pedro." And so, you know, a couple weeks later, we were in a plane and doing a semifinal interviews with 20 or so people in Miami, and one of them was Pedro. Pedro was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. I mean, there was like a shiny key light on him at all times. He walked in a room and you just focused on him. He made you comfortable. He was able to sort of find out where you were and talk to you in a way that sort of disarmed you. Both of us knew within 5 minutes that he was going to be on the show. He was the first person we cast for Real World San Francisco. Then it was about who do we put with him. MTV was a little concerned about just surprising people. So they felt that we should let everyone know on the cast that someone would be HIV positive and that they should consult with their own doctor just to educate themselves. We knew that it was perfectly safe for people to live with someone who was HIV positive, but we assumed that they might not be comfortable with it. So our best advice was that they talk to their family doctor. And and I'm really sort of was surprised and sort of it was wonderful that all of them still wanted to do the show, still wanted to be the roommate of someone who was HIV positive. Now, they didn't know who it was going to be. So it was a bit of like there was going to be this moment of people trying to figure this out. Anyway, but we also didn't want Pedro to have to walk in there and sort of have that pressure. So we decided that Pedro would meet one of his roommates before arriving at the house. So we had him, one of his roommates was coming from Seal Beach, near, not too far from San Diego. And so she was going to take the Amtrak up towards Los Angeles, and that we would have Pedro get on the train in Los Angeles at Union Station, and that they could get to know each other. And we knew enough about Pedro that we were pretty sure that he would tell her his story, because he certainly wasn't shy about it. And it's exactly what happened. She asked him a few simple questions, and very quickly, I think one of them might be, do you have a girlfriend? And he goes, well, I don't have a girlfriend. I'd like to have a boyfriend. Pedro can hit it off with anyone, and there was instant chemistry between Pedro and Corey, and very quickly it came out that he was HIV positive, and he had this way of telling his story that just completely disarmed you, just opened you up to it, and made you receptive to hearing what he had to say. And so then they arrive in the house in San Francisco together. Pedro now has, the strength of having one person who already knows and already is supporting him. And so he gets in the house, and the roommates start meeting each other. And at first, they sort of thought this guy Puck, this bike messenger who showed up fresh from jail with several bike injuries and a little blood falling from his temple. They thought maybe he's the guy with AIDS because, I don't know, he's got some scabs on his face. But anyway, later that evening, Pedro brought out his scrapbook and started showing his roommates his sort of story. And there was a great moment there when Rachel, who was so great that she was in the cast because she was this conservative Latino woman from Arizona. And she was like, everyone else was, not sure Puck was there, but the other roommates were immediately incredibly supportive. But she would ask tough questions. She was like, she wasn't just going to, she was gonna, there was a little bit of an edge to her that actually was great, because she would ask questions that the rest of America would ask. And she asked them politely, but she wasn't just going to immediately fall in line. And I mean, that's the beauty of the show, is if you can cast people who are unapologetically themselves, because then you get something very real. And what was really wonderful is that Rachel and Pedro became very good friends, and he actually went to Arizona to visit her family and went to speak at her mother's school, Catholic school, where her mother taught. And he did his lecture about AIDS in an elementary school. We saw him fall in love with Sean Sasser. We saw his commitment ceremony with Sean. We saw him continue to do his speaking engagements. He let us see that moment when he found out that he only had 7 T cells. He let us see that moment when he had to go back to Miami to meet with his doctors and to regain his strength. And then, amazingly, when we had finished filming and when he started to get really sick, he asked us to continue to film and to tell his story to the end, which we did. After the show was completed, it began to air. And as it was airing, Pedro was simultaneously getting sicker and sicker. When he was in New York to do a speaking engagement, he went into the hospital. And that's where he said, I need you to keep filming. I need you to tell my story. Because he would soon lose his ability to speak, and he wanted to be able to tell that story until he couldn't. And so we continued to film, and we put together a special that we filmed at the Methodist Church in Hollywood, the one with the big red AIDS symbol on it for many years. President Clinton sent in an address to the crowd there where he talked about how Pedro had done way more than anything his administration could have done to awaken people to the importance of protecting yourself from AIDS by using common sense things like condoms. You know, Pedro got sick in New York. They sort of stabilized him, but ultimately he wanted to go home to Miami. And so his roommates from the railroad, Pam and Judd, were out in New York with him, and together with him, they flew down to Miami and were greeted by his family. And, you know, that's where, you know, he died a month or so later. And so we all went in for the funeral. And, you know, it was just, it was a tremendously sad, but at the same time, we all realized how lucky we were to have been in his life and how much he had done. So we were there to celebrate that life.